What if the life you are trying so hard to change is not asking you to become stronger, more successful, or more in control, but simply asking you to see it differently? What if the exhaustion you feel does not come only from what is happening around you, but from the endless conversation taking place inside you about what should be happening instead? There are moments when life itself is quiet, yet the mind is loud. Nothing is happening in this exact second, and still you may feel as though you are carrying yesterday, tomorrow, someone else's opinion, an old disappointment, and a future you are desperately trying to protect. Perhaps the deepest change begins when you notice this. You may have spent years believing that peace will arrive when certain conditions are finally met, when someone understands you, when a problem is resolved, when your family changes, when your health feels more certain, when you know what comes next, when the past no longer hurts, when you become the version of yourself you think you should have been by now. The mind is very skilled at placing peace somewhere in the distance. It says, not yet. First, life must cooperate with my expectations. And because life rarely follows every expectation, peace keeps being postponed. There is another way of moving through the world. It is quieter. It does not ask you to deny difficulty or pretend that pain does not exist. It does not require you to smile at everything that hurts. It simply invites you to notice how much suffering is created when the mind argues with what has already arrived. Imagine standing beside a river. The water is moving naturally around stones, branches, bends, and changing ground. It does not stop at each obstacle and insist that the obstacle should not be there. It adjusts. It continues. It remains faithful to its nature. Now imagine trying to control that river with your hands. You push the water backward. You try to hold one part of it in place. You become angry because it will not flow in the direction you planned. The river continues moving, but you become exhausted. Many of us live this way inwardly. We try to hold people where they used to be. We try to make the past different through regret. We try to force tomorrow into certainty through worry. We replay conversations because we want someone to have said something else. We judge ourselves for choices made by a younger version of us who did not yet possess the understanding we have today. We resist aging because we are attached to another season. We resist change because we confuse familiarity with safety. And somewhere in all this resistance, we begin to believe that life itself is the enemy. But perhaps life has never been against you. Perhaps the struggle is sometimes between life as it is and the picture your mind believes life must match before you are willing to relax. This does not mean that every event is easy or desirable. There are losses that change us. There are betrayals that hurt deeply. There are moments when uncertainty can make the ground beneath us feel unstable. There are times when grief comes without asking permission. Spiritual awareness does not erase the human heart. It allows the human heart to remain open without being completely ruled by fear. You may notice, for example, how quickly the mind turns uncertainty into prediction. Someone becomes distant, and the mind says, I am going to lose them. A plan changes, and the mind says, everything is falling apart. You make a mistake, and the mind says, this proves I am not enough. You see someone else moving forward, and the mind whispers, you are behind. The event may be small. The story becomes enormous. And then you react not only to what happened, but to the meaning your thoughts have placed around it. This is why changing your thoughts can change your life in a way that goes far deeper than positive thinking. It is not about decorating fear with cheerful words. It is about becoming aware of the voice that has been interpreting your life without ever being questioned. There is a part of the mind that wants everything labeled, success or failure, good or bad, ahead or behind, safe or dangerous, worthy or unworthy. It compares, measures, defends, remembers, insults, anticipates rejection, and searches constantly for proof that it is separate from everyone else. You may call this the ego, not as something evil, but as a frightened identity built from memories, roles, judgments, and expectations. The ego says, I am what happened to me. It says, I am what people think of me. It says, I am what I own, what I accomplish, how I look, how old I am, what I have lost, and whether others approve of me. Then life changes, one of those things, as life inevitably does, and the ego becomes afraid. But beneath that changing identity, perhaps there is something quieter. There is an awareness that has been present through every version of you. Think about this for a moment. Your body has changed. Your beliefs have changed. Your relationships have changed. Your fears have changed. Your dreams may have changed. The person you were 10 or 20 years ago may seem almost like someone you once knew, yet something has been here noticing all of it. There has been an awareness watching childhood become adulthood, excitement become disappointment, certainty become questioning, and perhaps questioning become wisdom. You do not have to name that presence. You might call it awareness, spirit, consciousness, your true nature, the source within you. The name is less important than the experience of recognizing that you are more than the noise passing through your mind. The sky is not damaged by the clouds moving across it. A storm may cover everything for a while, but the open sky remains behind it. In the same way, fearful thoughts may pass through your awareness without becoming the deepest truth of who you are. A thought may say, I cannot handle this. Awareness can quietly notice, fear is here. A thought may say, I will never forgive what happened. Awareness may notice, there is pain in me that still wants to be understood. A thought may say, I need this person to change so I can be peaceful. Awareness may ask, is my peace truly meant to be placed in another person's hands? These small moments of noticing are not small at all. They are the beginning of freedom. Perhaps you know what it is like to spend an entire day carrying one sentence someone said to you. They may have spoken for 10 seconds, yet your mind repeats those 10 seconds for 10 hours. You imagine what you should have said. You build arguments that never happen. You assign motives to the other person. You judge them, then judge yourself for being affected by them. Your body may be sitting in your home, but your mind is still standing inside that conversation. Now imagine that instead of continuing the battle, you become still enough to recognize what is happening. You notice the tightness in your chest. You notice the desire to be right. You notice the wish to be understood. You notice the hurt underneath the anger. And instead of condemning any of it, you simply become present. Something changes. Not necessarily the other person. Not the past. You change your relationship with the moment. The energy that was trapped in resistance begins to loosen. This is one of the quiet lessons found in the wisdom of the Tao. Life does not always ask to be conquered. Much of life asks to be met. A tree does not fight winter because it remembers summer. It releases what must fall. It stands through a season that appears empty. It does not dig into the frozen earth, demanding evidence that spring will return. It participates in a rhythm larger than its immediate appearance. There may be seasons in your own life when you are being invited into this kind of trust. You may not know what comes next. You may be releasing an identity you have carried for years. Perhaps a relationship has changed. Perhaps your children no longer need you in the same way. Perhaps your career no longer gives you the meaning it once did. Perhaps you look in the mirror and realize time has moved more quickly than you expected. Perhaps something you prayed would remain has ended. The mind may call this loss. Sometimes the soul experiences it as space. Space for another understanding. Space for another relationship with yourself. Space to discover that your identity was never meant to depend completely on one role, one person, or one chapter. The ego fears empty space because it immediately asks, what will replace this? But wisdom may invite a different question. What is this space allowing me to hear? There are things you can only hear when the noise becomes quiet. There are truths you can only recognize when your old certainty becomes less rigid. And there is a kind of peace that appears when you stop demanding that every unanswered question be answered immediately. You may have been taught to think of change as something you must force, but inner transformation often begins through allowing. You allow yourself to notice. You allow yourself to feel. You allow a thought to pass without following it. You allow another person to have an opinion you cannot control. You allow yesterday to remain yesterday. You allow the future to remain partly unknown. You allow yourself to be human without turning every imperfection into a verdict about your worth. And gradually, something inside you remembers how to soften. This is not weakness. A river is soft, yet it can shape stone. Silence seems empty, yet it can reveal what noise has hidden. Forgiveness may appear gentle, yet it can release years of inner captivity. Love does not always shout, yet it often transforms what force cannot touch. Perhaps the life you are seeking is not waiting on the other side of becoming someone new. Perhaps it begins by remembering the part of you that existed before fear told you who you had to be. Before comparison told you that you were behind. Before disappointment told you to close your heart. Before the need for approval taught you to abandon yourself. There is still a quiet place within you that has not been damaged by every thought you have believed. And as we move deeper into this journey, the question will not be how to destroy the ego or fight your thoughts. Fighting them would only create another form of resistance. The deeper question is this: what begins to happen when you can see the fearful voice clearly without allowing it to lead your life? Because the moment you can observe that voice, you are already standing somewhere deeper than it. And that may be where the real change begins. There is a strange moment that comes when you begin to see the mind more clearly. You realize that many of the thoughts you once accepted without question are not neutral observations, they are habits. They are rehearsed reactions. They are old conclusions that have learned how to speak in your voice. The ego does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it sounds very reasonable. It says, you need to know what is going to happen. It says, you need to make sure this person does not leave. It says, you should be further along by now. It says, you cannot relax until this problem is solved. It says, if you do not protect yourself, someone will disappoint you again. And because these thoughts are often connected to real pain, they can feel like wisdom. But fear and wisdom are not the same thing. Fear tightens. Wisdom creates space. Fear demands certainty. Wisdom can remain present inside uncertainty. Fear says, control this. Wisdom asks, can I meet this moment without abandoning myself? This distinction matters because one of the greatest sources of emotional exhaustion is the attempt to control what was never fully ours to control. You can influence your choices. You can speak honestly. You can set boundaries. You can decide where to place your attention. You can choose whether you nourish resentment or understanding. But you cannot control another person's heart. You cannot control the timing of every change. You cannot force someone to recognize your value. You cannot negotiate with aging. You cannot demand that uncertainty disappear before you begin living. And yet the ego will try. It will spend hours imagining conversations that have not happened. It will prepare responses to rejection that may never come. It will analyze a message, a facial expression, a delay, a silence. It will search for hidden meaning because uncertainty feels unbearable. Perhaps you have experienced this. Someone you care about does not respond as quickly as usual. At first, there is only silence. Then the mind begins to fill the silence. Something is wrong. They are upset. They are pulling away. I must have done something. Within a few minutes, you are no longer responding to reality. You are responding to a story. The body does not always know the difference. Your heart rate changes. Your muscles tighten. Your mood shifts. Your entire inner world begins reacting to an event created partly by imagination. Then the message arrives. Sorry, busy day, I'll call later. And suddenly the entire emotional storm loses its foundation. This is how powerful thought can be. The ego does not need reality to create suffering. It only needs an interpretation that you believe. Awareness changes this not by preventing thoughts from appearing, but by giving you a small space before you follow them. You begin saying inwardly, this is what my mind is telling me, but I do not yet know that it is true. That one sentence can become a doorway. The Tao reminds us again and again of the value of emptiness, openness, and not knowing. The ego sees uncertainty as a threat, but perhaps uncertainty is also where life remains alive. If everything were already known, there would be no discovery, no wonder, no growth, no unexpected kindness, no possibility of a path different from the one you planned. The mind wants certainty because certainty feels safe. But there are times when the demand for certainty becomes a prison. You may stay in a relationship long after love has become fear because the familiar feels safer than the unknown. You may remain inside an old identity because you know how to perform it. You may continue pleasing people because rejection feels more frightening than self-betrayal. You may keep replaying the past because even pain can feel familiar. The ego often prefers familiar suffering to unfamiliar freedom. And this is why awareness can feel uncomfortable at first. To see clearly means you may also see where you have been abandoning your own peace in order to preserve approval, control, or identity. People-pleasing is one example. Perhaps you learned early that being agreeable kept things calm. You became sensitive to other people's moods. You knew how to make yourself smaller, easier, quieter, more useful. Over time, you may have confused this with love. You say yes when your body is saying no. You apologize for needing rest. You carry responsibilities no one explicitly asked you to carry. You fear disappointing others more than you fear disappointing yourself. Then resentment begins to appear. At first, you may resent the people around you. They expect too much. They never think about me. They do not appreciate what I do. Sometimes that may be true, but awareness may invite a deeper question. How often have I taught people that my needs do not matter because I was afraid to express them? This question is not about blame. It is about freedom. The moment you see the pattern, you are no longer completely trapped inside it. You can begin choosing love without self-erasure, kindness without self-abandonment, compassion without losing your center. The Tao does not teach us to become passive. It invites us into harmony, and harmony requires truth. A tree does not apologize for needing sunlight. The ocean does not feel guilty for having tides. The seasons do not ask permission to change. Nature does not constantly compare itself with itself. And yet human beings can spend an enormous portion of life comparing. Comparison is one of the ego's favorite ways to keep you disconnected from the present. You see someone younger who appears more successful, and suddenly your life seems late. You see a couple who seems happy, and your own relationship feels inadequate. You see someone who has the body, home, confidence, family, freedom, or spiritual calm you wish you had, and the mind creates a painful equation. They have more, therefore I am less. But life is not an equation of worth. A rose does not become less beautiful because a sunflower is taller. The moon does not compete with the sun. Winter does not fail because it does not look like spring. Each expression of life has its own rhythm. The ego measures because it wants to know where it stands. Higher, lower, ahead, behind, winning, losing. But the true self does not need to stand above anyone. It only needs to stand in truth. The moment you compare your inner life with someone else's outer appearance, you leave yourself. You stop inhabiting your own experience. You begin living inside an imaginary ranking. And because there will always be someone who appears to have more of something, the game has no peaceful ending. Awareness ends the game not by telling you that you are better, but by reminding you that comparison itself may be the wrong question. Instead of asking, am I doing better than they are? You might gently ask, am I living in alignment with what feels true and loving within me? That is a quieter question, and it cannot be answered by looking at anyone else. Attachment works in a similar way. The ego says, I need this particular outcome in order to be okay. There is nothing wrong with having hopes. There is nothing wrong with loving someone deeply. There is nothing wrong with wanting healing, companionship, meaningful work, or a certain possibility. The suffering begins when desire becomes identity. When you say, if this does not happen, I cannot be whole. Then the desire is no longer simply a preference. It becomes a condition placed on peace. You may have noticed how attachment changes the quality of love. When love becomes attached to control, it becomes anxious. You begin watching, checking, predicting, protecting. You stop enjoying the person because you are afraid of losing them. You stop living the moment because you are trying to secure the next one. This happens with children, partners, friends, careers, homes, health, and even spiritual progress. You can become attached to the idea that you should always feel peaceful. Then the moment anxiety returns, you think you have failed. But peace is not the absence of every difficult emotion. Peace is the space that can hold emotion without becoming lost inside it. The ocean is not less ocean because there are waves. Your deeper nature is not destroyed because fear visits. You can feel anxiety and still be aware. You can feel sadness and still be present. You can feel uncertainty and still choose gentleness. This may be one of the most important shifts in the entire journey. You do not need to eliminate every uncomfortable thought before you can be free. You only need to stop giving every thought authority. There is a difference between having a thought and becoming the thought. There is a difference between noticing fear and letting fear make every decision. There is a difference between remembering pain and building your identity around pain. Suppose someone betrayed you years ago. The event was real. The hurt was real. Perhaps trust was broken in a way that changed you. The ego may take that experience and create a permanent law. People cannot be trusted. Love always ends in pain. I must protect myself. Never be vulnerable again. These conclusions feel protective, but over time, protection can become isolation. A wall built to keep pain out also keeps tenderness out. Awareness does not ask you to tear the wall down all at once. It simply invites you to notice that the wall exists. Then perhaps one brick at a time, you become willing to soften. Not because everyone is safe, not because boundaries are unnecessary, but because you begin to see that fear should not be given the authority to define every future relationship. This is where the ego can become very subtle. It can even turn healing into another form of control. I must become completely healed. I must stop feeling triggered. I must never get angry. I must become spiritually advanced. Then spirituality itself becomes a performance. You begin judging yourself for being human. But the deeper path may be much simpler. Can you notice what is here without condemning yourself? Can you feel anger and still choose not to become cruel? Can you notice jealousy without building a home inside it? Can you experience grief without deciding that life has abandoned you? Can you have a fearful thought and still return to love? This is awareness in practice. It is not perfection. It is remembering. Again and again. You forget. Then you remember. The mind runs ahead. Then you return. The ego becomes defensive. Then you notice. You react. Then later, perhaps with humility, you understand what happened. There is no need to create another ego around being spiritual. The invitation is not to become someone who never struggles. It is to become someone who can see struggle with greater compassion. There is a beautiful softness in this. Imagine sitting beneath a large tree during a storm. The wind moves through its branches. Leaves shake, some fall. The tree does not mistake movement for destruction. It remains rooted. Your awareness can become that root. The thoughts may move. The emotions may move. Circumstances may move. But something within you can remain connected to a deeper ground. That ground is not based on praise. It is not based on certainty. It is not based on getting your way. It is not based on being right. It is a quieter sense that you belong to life even when you do not understand life. This is where the need to be right begins to soften. Think of how much energy is spent defending positions. Arguments continue in the mind long after conversations end because the ego wants vindication. It wants the other person to admit, you were right, I was wrong. Perhaps sometimes they were unfair. Perhaps you do deserve an apology. But there are moments when waiting for someone else to validate your experience keeps you emotionally tied to them. You may be carrying an argument with someone who has already moved on. You are still standing in the courtroom, still presenting evidence, still asking for a verdict. And the cost is your peace. There comes a time when you may ask, would I rather be right or would I rather be free? This does not mean surrendering truth. It means recognizing when the need to prove something is costing more than it gives. The Tao often points toward humility, not as weakness, but as freedom from the need to dominate. Water does not insist on the highest position. It moves toward the low places. And because it does not compete, it nourishes everything. There is wisdom in becoming less interested in proving and more interested in understanding. Less interested in winning and more interested in remaining connected to your own heart. This becomes especially important in close relationships. The people you love will sometimes misunderstand you. They will sometimes disappoint you. You will sometimes disappoint them. Two people can experience the same conversation differently. The ego wants one version declared correct. Awareness can hold complexity. It can say, my pain is real, and perhaps theirs is too. It can say, I do not agree with what they did, but I do not need hatred to protect myself. It can say, I can create distance without creating poison inside myself. This is where love becomes more mature. Love is not always closeness. Sometimes love is a boundary. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is leaving. Sometimes it is forgiving without returning. Sometimes it is releasing the demand that another person become who you needed them to be. And perhaps this is one of the hardest forms of letting go. We often do not only hold on to people, we hold on to our image of who they were supposed to become. A parent was supposed to understand. A partner was supposed to stay. A friend was supposed to be loyal. A child was supposed to choose another path. A family member was supposed to apologize. Some of the deepest grief in life comes not only from what happened, but from what never happened. The conversation you never received, the acknowledgement that never came, the relationship you hoped would heal, the future that did not arrive. The ego says, I cannot let go because letting go means it did not matter. But letting go does not mean it did not matter. Sometimes letting go is how you honor what mattered without allowing its absence to rule the rest of your life. A leaf releases the tree not because the season was meaningless, but because its season is complete. What if you allowed some things to become complete? Not erased, not denied, complete. There is great peace in allowing a chapter to be what it was. You take the wisdom, you feel the grief, You release the demand that the past rewrite itself. Then something in you becomes available to the present. This is the movement from ego into awareness. Not a dramatic leap, a quiet loosening. You begin to notice how often fear has been trying to protect you through control. You begin to notice comparison without obeying it. You begin to notice attachment without allowing it to become desperation. You begin to notice the need for approval, the need to be right, the need to predict, the need to hold. And instead of fighting these patterns, you see them. What is seen clearly begins to lose some of its unconscious power. This is why awareness is so transformative. Light does not fight darkness. It simply reveals what was hidden. The moment you become aware of a thought, you are no longer completely inside it. The moment you can say, this is fear, something deeper than fear is present. The moment you can say, this is my need for control, there is already an awareness beyond control. The moment you can say, I am comparing again, you have already returned, even slightly, to yourself. This is where freedom begins. Not when the mind becomes silent forever. Not when life becomes predictable. Not when everyone understands you. Freedom begins when you no longer require the outer world to obey your expectations before you permit yourself to return to peace. And from this place, another question quietly appears. If you are not the fearful voice, if you are not the comparison, if you are not the resentment, if you are not the story you have carried for years, then who are you beneath all of that? Perhaps the answer cannot be reached by thinking harder. Perhaps it must be remembered. And perhaps remembering begins when you become willing to release what you have been carrying long enough to hear the quiet presence that has been there all along. And when you begin to listen for that quiet presence, you may discover something surprising. It was never gone. It was simply covered by noise. The noise of fear, the noise of judgment, the noise of old stories, the noise of trying to control what cannot be controlled, the noise of trying to become acceptable to people who may never fully understand you. Beneath all of that, there is still something steady. You may not always feel it clearly. You may lose contact with it for days, months, even years, but there are moments when it appears. Perhaps when you are watching the morning light enter a room. Perhaps when you are alone near water. Perhaps when someone you love is sleeping beside you and for a few seconds you are not asking anything from life. You are simply present. In those moments, the mind becomes quieter, and without effort, you remember something. You are here. You are alive. You are part of something larger than the story you have been telling yourself. This remembering is not about becoming someone more spiritual. It is about returning to what was already present before fear became your teacher. And one of the clearest ways back is forgiveness. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. Many people hear the word and immediately think it means excusing what happened, pretending the wound was not real, allowing someone to mistreat you again, forgetting what you learned. But forgiveness can be something very different. It can be the moment you decide that what happened will no longer be allowed to occupy your inner world every day. You may not be ready to forgive someone completely. That is all right. You do not have to force a feeling that has not yet arrived. You can begin more gently. You can simply notice what resentment is costing you. Perhaps the person who hurt you is no longer in your life, yet every time you remember them, your body tightens. Your mind begins the same argument. You relive the same injustice. In this way, the event continues. Not because it is happening again outside you, but because it is still happening inside you. Forgiveness becomes an act of release. You are not saying what you did was acceptable. You are saying, I am no longer willing to carry this pain in the same way. There is dignity in that. Imagine holding a burning coal because you are waiting for someone else to admit they started the fire. At some point, the question becomes simple. How long are you willing to burn your own hand? You can put the coal down, not for them, for you, and sometimes the person you need to forgive is yourself. This may be even harder. You remember a decision you regret, a relationship you stayed in too long, a chance you did not take, something you said in anger, a way you failed to protect yourself, a period of your life when you were lost. The mind looks backward with present-day understanding and judges the person you were then. How could I have done that? Why did I not know better? But perhaps a gentler question is possible. What did I know then? What was I afraid of? What was I trying to survive? What had I not yet learned? Self-forgiveness is not pretending there were no consequences. It is allowing wisdom to replace punishment. There is no spiritual value in endlessly sentencing yourself for being human. If you have learned, then perhaps the lesson has already begun doing its work. A seed does not hate itself for once being buried. The darkness was part of the becoming. Your past may contain moments you would never choose again, but those moments may also have helped reveal what matters to you now. You can bow to the lesson without worshiping the pain. You can carry the wisdom without carrying the shame. And as forgiveness begins to loosen the past, surrender begins to loosen the future. Surrender is another word that is often misunderstood. It does not mean giving up. It does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean refusing to act. Surrender means releasing the belief that your peace depends on controlling the final outcome. You still take the next loving step. You still speak truth. You still make decisions. You still care. But you stop demanding that life follow the exact picture in your mind. There is a great difference between intention and control. Intention says, this is the direction of my heart. Control says, it must happen this way. Intention has openness. Control has fear. You may intend to create a loving relationship, but you cannot control who another person becomes. You may intend to heal an old family wound, but you cannot force someone else to participate. You may intend to live with purpose, but you may not yet know the form that purpose will take. You may intend to move into a new season, but you cannot see every turn in the road. When intention is joined with surrender, life becomes less like a battle and more like a conversation. You bring your sincerity. Life brings its mystery. You act. You listen. You adjust. You trust. This is very close to the wisdom of water. Water moves, but it does not force. It takes the shape of what is present without losing its nature. When it meets a rock, it does not declare the journey ruined. It moves around. When the path narrows, it narrows. When there is space, it expands. And over time, what seems soft can transform what seems hard. Perhaps this is how you can begin relating to your own life. You do not need to push against every closed door until you are exhausted. Sometimes a closed door is information. Sometimes delay is information. Sometimes silence is information. Not always a punishment. Not always rejection. Simply information. A different direction may be opening. The ego often says, if this path closes, there is no path. The deeper self may whisper, I cannot yet see the path. These are very different statements. One creates despair. The other creates space. Trust lives in that space. Trust does not require you to believe that everything will happen exactly as you want. It may simply mean believing that you can remain connected to yourself even when life changes. You can meet what comes. You can listen. You can learn. You can begin again. This kind of trust is not built from certainty. It is built from presence. Think of how many times in your life something ended and at the time you believed you would never recover. A friendship, a relationship, a job, a version of yourself, a dream. And yet here you are, different perhaps, softer in some places, stronger in others, more aware. What you feared would destroy you may have become part of what taught you how deeply you can feel and still continue. This does not mean every loss was necessary or good. It means life may still carry meaning even through what you did not choose. And meaning becomes easier to hear when you stop asking only, why did this happen to me? Sometimes a more healing question is, who am I being invited to become through this? Not more impressive, not more successful, more awake, more compassionate, more honest, more willing to love without gripping, more willing to live without constant defense. This is where intention becomes spiritual. Instead of asking only, what do I want from life? You may begin asking, what qualities do I want to bring to life? Do I want to bring patience? Do I want to bring courage? Do I want to bring gentleness? Do I want to bring forgiveness? Do I want to bring presence? Because there may be situations you cannot change immediately, but you can change what you bring into them. Suppose you are caring for an aging parent. Perhaps the situation is tiring. You repeat the same conversations. You watch someone who once seemed strong become more dependent. Part of you may feel grief before the loss has even fully happened. You may also feel frustration, guilt, tenderness, anger, and love all at once. The ego may judge these emotions. You should be more patient. You should not feel tired. But the true self does not require you to become less human in order to become more loving. You can admit that you are tired. You can ask for help. You can create limits. And then inside one ordinary moment, you may choose presence. You sit beside them. You stop trying to make the moment different. You notice their hands. You hear their voice. You understand that this season will not last forever, and suddenly the ordinary becomes sacred. Not because the difficulty disappears, because you have become fully present to what is here. This is what alignment can feel like. It is not always a mystical experience. Sometimes it is simply being where you are, fully, without mentally leaving. Love lives here too. The ego often thinks love means possession. If you love me, stay. If you love me, agree. If you love me, make me feel safe. But love at a deeper level has more freedom. It wants the good of the other without trying to own them. It allows truth. It allows difference. It allows change. This is not easy, because human love naturally carries attachment. But there may be a way to hold people with open hands instead of closed fists. You can love your children without owning their future. You can love your partner without making them responsible for your entire sense of worth. You can love your friends without demanding that they remain exactly as they were 10 years ago. You can love someone who has left and still let them go. This kind of love says, you matter to me, and I will not turn that love into a cage. It also says, I matter too. So love includes boundaries. Sometimes returning to your true self means admitting that a relationship is not peaceful simply because it is familiar. You may have spent years confusing forgiveness with endless access, but you can forgive and still say no. You can wish someone well and still step away. You can release hatred without reopening a door. This is not a failure of love. Sometimes it is love becoming wise. The same wisdom applies to your relationship with yourself. How often have you spoken to yourself in ways you would never speak to someone you love? You make a mistake, and the mind becomes cruel. You look in the mirror, and judgment begins. You compare your body to a younger version of itself. You compare your life to an imagined schedule. You look at your age and say, it is too late. But what if aging is not evidence that life is disappearing? What if it is evidence that life has been lived? The lines on a face are not insults. The changes in your body are not betrayals. A tree does not apologize in autumn. It becomes another expression of itself. There can be grace in allowing yourself to belong to each season. You do not need to remain who you were in order to remain worthy. And perhaps your purpose changes too. The ego often wants purpose to be large, visible, important, something other people can recognize. But purpose may be much quieter than that. Perhaps purpose is not one grand assignment. Perhaps it is how you meet the person in front of you, how you listen, how you speak, how you treat yourself when no one is watching, how much love you bring into the room. A meaningful life may be composed of very ordinary moments, lived consciously. You may never know how one kind word changed someone's day. You may never know what your forgiveness interrupted in a family pattern. You may never know what your calm presence gave to a frightened person. The ego asks, did I do enough? The soul may ask, was I present? There is relief in that question, because presence is available now. You do not have to wait for a perfect future to begin living in alignment. You can begin in the next conversation, the next pause, the next moment of irritation, the next moment fear appears. You can notice the old reaction rising. Perhaps someone criticizes you. Your immediate impulse is to defend yourself. You feel heat in the body. The old thought appears. They do not respect me. And then awareness enters. You pause, not because you are weak, because you are free enough not to let every impulse become action. You listen for what is true. Maybe you need to speak. Maybe you need to remain silent. Maybe the criticism contains something useful. Maybe it says more about the other person than about you. The important thing is that you are no longer reacting only from conditioning. There is space. And within that space, intention becomes possible. You can ask, what would love do here? Not sentimental love, not approval. The kind of love that includes truth, dignity, compassion, and wisdom. Sometimes love will speak gently. Sometimes love will say no. Sometimes love will leave the room. Sometimes love will apologize. Sometimes love will forgive. Sometimes love will simply refuse to continue an unnecessary argument. This is how thoughts begin changing your life. Not because you force yourself to think only pleasant thoughts, but because you become conscious enough to choose which thoughts deserve your energy. You stop feeding every fear. You stop rehearsing every injury. You stop making every uncertainty into catastrophe. You stop asking comparison to tell you your value. And little by little, your inner climate changes. It is like tending a garden. You cannot prevent every weed from appearing, but you do not have to water all of them. You can notice them. You can pull some gently. You can give more attention to what you want to grow. Gratitude, compassion, stillness, trust, forgiveness, love, not as slogans, as practices of attention. And perhaps one morning you will notice something simple. The same problem is still there, but you are not carrying it in the same way. The same person has not changed, but their behavior no longer determines your entire emotional state. The future is still uncertain, but uncertainty feels less like an enemy. The past still exists, but it no longer has the same grip. This is inner transformation, quiet, often invisible, and deeply real. You may begin to understand that peace was never something life was supposed to hand you after everything became perfect. Peace is something you practice by returning to the deepest part of yourself while life remains imperfect. You return when you forgive. You return when you release. You return when you stop trying to control another person. You return when you notice fear without bowing to it. You return when you choose love without abandoning truth. You return when you trust one step without demanding the whole road. And the more often you return, the more familiar this inner home becomes. Eventually, you may realize you were never trying to find yourself. You were learning how to stop leaving yourself. And that realization brings us to the final movement of this journey. How to live this wisdom not only in quiet moments, but in ordinary mornings, difficult conversations, uncertain seasons, and the simple rhythm of everyday life. And so the deepest question is not whether you can understand these ideas while listening quietly. The deeper question is whether you can remember them when life becomes noisy again. Because life will become noisy. There will be mornings when you wake with worry already waiting for you. There will be conversations that stir old wounds. There will be moments when someone disappoints you, when plans change, when the future feels unclear, when the ego becomes loud again and tells you that peace is somewhere else. This does not mean you have failed. It means you are human. The spiritual journey is not a straight line from fear to permanent peace. It is a practice of returning. Returning to awareness, returning to love, returning to the present, returning to the quiet place within you that does not need everything to be resolved before it can breathe. You may begin each morning with a few minutes of stillness before the world begins asking things from you, before you reach for your phone, before you check what happened while you were sleeping, before you remember every responsibility waiting for you. Simply sit, listen to your breathing, notice the room, notice the silence underneath the sounds. You do not have to achieve anything in these moments. You do not have to make your mind empty. If thoughts appear, let them appear. Watch them the way you might watch leaves moving along a river. Some thoughts will say, today will be difficult. Some will remind you of yesterday. Some will move quickly into tomorrow. You can simply notice there is thinking, there is worry, there is planning, and beneath all of it, there is awareness. You are already here. This simple recognition can change the tone of an entire day. Instead of entering life from reaction, you begin from presence. And throughout the day, you can return in small ways. Perhaps you are standing in a long line and irritation begins. You notice the mind saying, this is wasting my time. Then you remember that this moment is also your life. Not just the moments when everything goes according to plan. This moment too. So you breathe. You look around. You allow the waiting to be what it is. The situation has not changed, but the suffering may soften. This is the wisdom of the Tao becoming practical. You stop demanding that every part of life move at the speed of your preference. You begin meeting the rhythm that is already here. Perhaps someone says something that triggers you. Before responding, you notice the reaction forming. There is heat. There is defensiveness. There is the old desire to prove something. And maybe you take one breath, just one. That breath creates a little space between stimulus and response. Inside that space, you remember that you have a choice. You can repeat an old pattern, or you can bring a new quality into the moment. Maybe that quality is patience. Maybe it is honesty. Maybe it is silence. Maybe it is a boundary spoken without cruelty. This is how a life changes. Not always through dramatic transformation, often through 1,000 quiet moments when awareness interrupts habit. Gratitude can become another way of returning. Not forced gratitude, not pretending everything is wonderful. A gentler kind. You might notice the warmth of water on your hands. The person who called to check on you. The fact that your body carried you through another day. A tree outside your window. A meal. A moment of laughter. A quiet room. The breath entering your lungs without being asked. Gratitude does not deny what is missing. It reminds you that absence is not the whole story. The ego is often trained to search for what is wrong. Gratitude teaches attention to become wider. You can hold grief and gratitude at the same time. You can miss someone and still love the morning. You can feel uncertain and still appreciate what is here. You can be healing and still notice beauty. This is not contradiction. It is wholeness. Forgiveness can also become a daily practice. Some mornings you may remember a person who hurt you and feel that the pain is still alive. You do not need to force yourself to say, I forgive completely. Perhaps you simply say inwardly, I am willing to carry this differently. That is enough for today. You may imagine setting down one small piece of the burden. Tomorrow, there may be another. Forgiveness often happens gradually, like winter ice melting under a patient sun. You do not have to break the ice with force. You can bring warmth. The same is true with self-forgiveness. When you hear yourself speaking harshly inwardly, pause. Ask whether the voice is helping you become wiser or simply keeping you ashamed. There is a difference. Wisdom says, learn from this. Shame says, become this. Wisdom sees behavior. Shame defines identity. You can acknowledge a mistake without turning it into your name. You can say, I wish I had chosen differently, and now I can choose differently. That is how the past becomes a teacher instead of a prison. Trust can become another quiet practice. At the end of the day, you may notice how many things remain unresolved. Messages unanswered, decisions unfinished, questions without solutions. The ego wants to carry all of them into sleep. But perhaps you can practice putting them down. Not permanently, just for the night. You can say, I have done what I can today. The rest does not need to be solved in this moment. There is humility in this. You are allowing life to continue without your constant mental supervision. The sun will rise without your worry. The earth will continue turning without your control. Perhaps the source is not asking you to manage everything. Perhaps it is asking you to participate fully, then release what was never yours to hold. This way of living can gradually change your relationship with purpose as well. You may stop asking, what great thing am I supposed to accomplish? And begin asking, how do I want to be while I am here? Do you want to be someone who brings calm into a frightened room? Someone who listens without rushing to fix? Someone who can apologize without collapsing into shame? Someone who can disagree without hatred? Someone who can leave what is unhealthy without carrying bitterness? Someone who notices beauty before it disappears? These may seem like small things, but perhaps the spiritual life has always been hidden inside small things. A glass of water offered with care. A pause before anger, a hand held during grief, a judgment released, a truth spoken gently, a moment when you choose not to repeat the pain that was handed to you. This is how peace becomes embodied. You may still have anxious days. You may still forget. You may still compare. You may still try to control. And when you notice this, there is no need for another layer of judgment. Just return. Return like the breath. Return like the tide. Return like morning light after darkness. Each return strengthens something quiet within you. Eventually, you may recognize that changing your thoughts was never really about controlling every thought that entered your mind. It was about changing your relationship with thought. You no longer believe every fearful sentence. You no longer treat every judgment as truth. You no longer allow every memory to decide the future. You become the space in which thoughts can arise and pass. And from that space, you can choose again. You can choose peace over proving, love over fear, forgiveness over resentment, presence over endless prediction, trust over obsessive control. Not perfectly, but consciously. And this is where your life begins to feel different from the inside. The world may still contain uncertainty. People may still misunderstand you. Some doors may close. Some seasons may end before you are ready. The body will age. Relationships will change. Life will remain life. But perhaps you no longer need life to become something else before you can meet it with an open heart. You begin moving more like water. You stop fighting every stone. You learn when to flow around, when to pause, when to move, and when to simply be still. You discover that softness can be strong. That surrender can contain courage. That forgiveness can protect your freedom. That silence can teach. That love does not require possession. And that peace is not waiting for you somewhere at the end of the road. It is available in the way you take the next step. Perhaps the greatest realization is this: you were never asked to manufacture a new self. The deeper self was already here. The loving awareness beneath the fear was already here. The quiet presence beneath the mental noise was already here. You were not incomplete. You were distracted. You were not separated from the source. You had simply become absorbed in the voice that said you were separate. And now you are remembering that you are more than the story, more than the wound, more than the mistake, more than the role, more than someone else's opinion. You are the awareness capable of meeting all of these things with compassion. So when you leave this quiet moment and return to your day, you do not need to carry every idea with you. Carry one simple remembrance: you do not have to fight life in order to belong to life. When fear rises, notice it. When resentment rises, soften where you can. When control tightens, breathe. When judgment appears, become curious. When you forget who you are, become still long enough to remember. And perhaps tonight, when the world becomes quiet again, you will look back on your day and recognize one small moment when you responded differently. One moment when you chose peace instead of reaction. One moment when you released what you could not control. One moment when you treated yourself with more kindness. Let that be enough. A peaceful life is built from moments like these. If this journey has stirred something within you, you are welcome to share in the comments what you are ready to release, forgive, or see differently. Sometimes giving language to an inner realization helps it become more conscious. And if these quiet reflections help you reconnect with the deeper wisdom already within you, you can subscribe and continue these spiritual journeys whenever you need a place to return. Until then, move gently. Let life breathe. Let yourself breathe. You do not need to know every answer. You do not need to control every outcome. You do not need to become someone else before you deserve peace. Perhaps all you need in this moment is to remember what has been quietly true beneath the noise all along. You are already home.